Hey guys, today we're talking about a full build guide for Incinerate that I've been really enjoying lately. It's tanky, consistent, and surprisingly smooth for an off-meta pick. And in this video I'll walk you through the pros, the cons, the gear, the leveling, and how it all comes together. All the important timestamps are in the description if you want to skip around. The build works well on every map layout and handles every map mod without any issue. A big part of the build strength comes from slowing the game down using Temporal chains and Chronomancer passives, which creates a unique layer of defense. The build could be an easy league starter. On just 20 exiles, the build should handle early maps in endgame fairly easily. With 5 to 10 divines, it becomes very solid and fully capable of handling everything in a mapping, really. Around 20 to 30 divines is where the build caps out damage-wise. Bosses do take some time to burn down, since the build doesn't have massive single target damage. That's the main issue with the build, really. That said, boss damage is low across the board for most spell builds right now, so it's something to watch in a future patch notes. It also fits really nicely into party play with used tempo chains and the Chronomancer's slowing aura. Temporal Rift is another highlight. It gives you great sustain, acting as a kind of a get out of jail free card. You can also rewind time after taking a big hit, or you can just refill your mana during very hectic fights. It's a really fun skill to build around. Of course, it's not all sunshine. This isn't a meta build. There are faster, tankier, and stronger builds out there. The damage is moderate, and there aren't many ways to scale it further without hoping for some buffs from GGG. Also, while Temporal Rift is super useful, misusing it or using it without paying attention can actually get you killed. You need to keep track of where and how you were a few seconds ago. So let's talk about itemization. The core of the build centers around a unique chest that supports recoup mechanics. For the ones who want a rare one with a +4 to all spell gems, so it's not just for Incinerate, but to buff Temporal chains and other spells tied to Path of Ignite. Same goes for the focus item. Prioritize +2 levels and spell-related stats. For the one slot, use the Iron Urn for a bit of extra damage, which comes from the latest patch from GGG. For the rest of the gear, stick to the basics like life, energy shield, mana, and resistances, so classic defenses. Down of the hand, introduce new talismans that we can slot into the gear. So we are going to use Serpent Talisman in the gloves and the Ox Talisman in the boots. It's quite useful upgrade for the Chronomancer's unique aura. Speaking of gloves, there's also an interesting unique you can try, the Prison's Manacles. These gloves can boost your Temporal chains and hinder effects even more, but the drawback is that you lose the ability to immobilize enemies, which means no more freezing. That's actually pretty significant for this build, since we rely on freeze quite a bit for extra slowing and damage layering. If you decide to use them, make sure you swap out the climate change passive on passive tree for something else. Overall, it's a trade-off, and whether it's worth it really depends on your setup and playstyle. I could say it more useful if you decide to skip the Path of Ignite setup and go with more chaos damage approach, but that's a topic for another guide, as it requires more tests. But if you are impatient, I attached untested passive tree and setup with Black Flame Ring that was actually suggested by some of you. So thanks for a great idea. For quality of life, we can use Crackle Creep as one of the rings. It proliferates the ignites, so we can just one-tap one monster and just go to another pack. It gives us basically a free support slot because we won't need a wildfire support, and you can just focus on the just pure damage. The second ring should give us some fire damage, life, mana, and resist. Alternatively, it could be the Black Flame. The amulet can be your damage booster. ideally +2 gems levels and with recoup to further boost your survivability. Spirit enables us to use Mana Remnant's aura, which has recently been updated and synergizes nicely with this build. If you miscalculate required spirit, you can always sacrifice some of your passive to allocate them here, which is quite handy. And as for the Annoints, there are two solid options. A cheap and practical one is Immolation, which not only gives good offensive value, but also comes with 10 strength. And more expensive option would be a Dynamism, which provides a strong global damage boost that scales with every part of your setup. And let's go about the skills. Of course, the main skill here is Incinerate. It can be a little clunky at first, but unsupported properly, it becomes a surprisingly fast and reliable spell. For mapping, all you need is a quick tap to kill a pack, and everything left behind is usually finished off by Crackle Creep, which means a proliferation or wildfire effect. All the supports are focused on pure spell damage. For mapping, I recommend using Magnified effect for better area coverage. It makes mapping experience much more easier. For bossing, switch to Conk effect for that tighter focused damage. You can swap Fire Mastery with Deliberation if you want more raw power, but in my opinion, getting slowed down that much just doesn't feel good. Incinerate comes with really useful built-in mechanics. The recently updated exposure effect can be scaled on your passive tree up to 70-80%, which significantly reduces enemies' fire resistances. On top of that, the spell leaves fields of fire that linger for a while. This is super useful. You can lay down your damage before a fight even starts, like before triggering a ritual, an expedition, or starting a boss phase. The build scales damage primarily through Ignite Magnitude, Fire Elemental damage, and most importantly, gem levels. It's not the most complex damage scaling setup, and there is definitely room for improvement if GGG ever buffs Ignite's mechanics. And because we are using Ignite, I decided to build around Cast on Ignite. And it's been working really well alongside Incinerate. And yes, the fields and wildfire are adding to the energy buildup. The only downside is that the damage doesn't quite reach what we saw with comets or freeze-based spells before the nerfs. Still, it's enough to comfortably farm tier 16, tier 18 maps while being delirious. I went with comets in the Cast on Ignite setup because they help trigger some passives that increase elemental damage on freeze and chill, which actually benefits Incinerate too. Plus, the chill adds yet another slowing effect, which stacks with Temporal Chains and Chronomancer, making enemies move even in slower motion, which is very satisfying. There's also room for some meme spell combos here, since most of the time you will only need Incinerate Ignite to do heavy lifting. That means you got some freedom with your spare sockets. So throw in a fireball or any other flashy spell if you want to see how close you can get to crashing your PC. And if you ever wondered why I keep a bit of mana floating just above the zero, it's because Mana Remnants keeps fueling the madness, letting you spam these extra spells without completely burning out. And it's possible only because the latest update that enables globe generation from ignited enemies, which is super nice considering that the comets are really mana hungry. It's not essential, but it's a nice utility piece, and you can swap it out for something else or skip it if you don't have enough spirit for now. Besides that, I also try to make the new nerfed Flame Blast, but it really only does meaningful damage when it crits, and this build isn't really scaling crit. Trying to force it would mean sacrificing slow magnitude, recoup passives, and that doesn't make sense for me. And Solar Orb could be used as a small source of mana regeneration and life regen, but I don't really see a point of it. It's not really enough to make any meaningful difference in the boss fights or any other fights. And last but not least, we are using a pretty standard blasphemy setup with temporal chains, which, let's be honest, I probably mentioned a few hundred times by now. It's supported by a ritualistic curse, encumbrance, and heightened curse. Just a heads up though, this setup can get very spirit hungry, especially when you are just getting started with it. So the last support could be added much later into the game. One of the big tools we get is Time Freeze. It's incredibly useful when facing tougher rares or juiced bosses, and it really shines in party play. It literally lets you pause the fight. If you want to chain it more often, you can link it with a second wind. But the real MVP is still Temporal Rift. It can be used constantly, and it's basically an instant recovery button. You take a big hit, pop it, and your life and mana snaps back. It even rewinds your position, so it works as a dodge skill tool. The only real downside is that you need to be mindful of your state a few seconds ago, health, mana, and positioning. The skill doesn't give super clear visual feedback, but after a few hours of use, it becomes a second nature. And for the passives, my first pick was Apex of the Moment, which helps a ton with bosses during the campaign and into the maps. It slows the enemies and increases the duration of your ignites, which is a nice bonus. Next up is Footprints in Sand, which gives a unique and fun gameplay feel. Lastly, if you invest in recoup mechanics, pick up Rapid River. If you don't go that route yet, Ultimate Command is better third choice. I added both the leveling tree and more defense-focused endgame version in the description, so you can check this out. When it comes to the jewels, just look for spell or elemental damage, ignite magnitude, and one with mana recovered on kill is a nice touch. If you want to go full budget breaker, you can pick up Prism of Belief, which currently costs around 10 divines. It's hard to recommend unless you're aiming for +3 versions of pinnacle bosses. It's basically a chase item for this build. The leveling experience was surprisingly smooth. Once you get more slow effects stacked, bosses and mobs become a lot more manageable. Key leveling items are again Crackle Creep, and for the staff you can use the Steering Touch. Both are cheap and give you great quality of life. You don't need cast on Ignite during leveling, just go with Blasphemy plus Temporal Chains and you are good to go. Zenith support is also really useful early on, since you're barely using your mana. Even with current state of spell scaling, I had smooth experience. Maybe it was because of these tunics, but they are dirt cheap, so it's fair game for anyone starting fresh. Overall, I'm generally happy with how the build turns out. The damage does fall behind a bit in a pinnacle endgame fights, but the most importantly, current setup that costs 20 to 25 divines allows you to grab all the passives needed for the in-game mechanics. Fights against +3 versions are challenging, but are manageable. The theme of ignites and time manipulations is really satisfying to play. The defensive layers are really strong. The slow effects makes the game feel way more forgiving and just fun, plain and simple. Hopefully, the spells will get some minor buffs in the future updates, which would make this build even more viable at the high end. One last thing that I really dislike is more about current state of PoE, is the lack of chase items. Really, after 20 to 30 divines investment, I don't see much reason to play with this build. I'll probably try to make more boss-oriented character now, and of course the version with chaos damage, which could be more powerful, but in exchange for less defensive layers. Anyway, I will leave you with the footage from one of those endgame boss fights. Thanks for watching, see ya.